Hello and welcome to Cobalt Retro Tech. Hope you're having an amazing day. Now I know my Cobalt Retro Shop series looked exactly like this. This isn't a shop video, this is a Retro Tech video. Because this is a personal controller of mine, I don't want to sell this. However, as you might be able to tell, it is a little bit grimy. So, I figured, as I'm learning the process of doing more overhead videos like this in the style of the new Cobalt Retro Shop series, you can check that out, by the way. I have an eBay store and everything linked in the description. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. I figured while I'm trying to go through some of the growing pains of this style of video on my channel, might as well take apart an Xbox One controller. You can see here it's one of the later models because it has a built-in headphone jack. So that's how you can know if you have a newer style of controllers. If you're missing, if you have this headphone jack, especially if it has a button here in the center for sharing things, that's how you know it'll be a later style controller. However, something like this should also be able to work with some of the older style controllers. First things first, that caught me off guard when I first started cracking these guys open. There are actually no visible screws right off the bat. So if there are no visible screws, how are you supposed to get one of these guys open? Well, it all has to do with this plastic shield piece on the side, because that's how they're hiding all the screws. That's why I have this tool on the table here. You're going to need, you could do this with longer fingernails. I would recommend a plastic tool though, as your nails sometimes not the best job for this kind of stuff, and I would recommend against metal tools, as metal tools, even if you're careful, can still chew through plastic. So we should be able to just take this tool and eventually get this off. You're probably going to need to fight the controller a little bit to get it to actually work. I mean, if you really wanted to just clean only specific parts of the controller, you could definitely just take a tool like this and just like run it on the edges, but I want to clean this a little deeper. So yeah, you're going to be encountering a lot of plastic tabs here. And it does kind of sound like I'm breaking things. Sometimes if you want to get anywhere in life, you're going to have to be a little bit aggressive with this kind of stuff. The amount of effort that it does take to get one of those covers off, especially the first time around, it does have me a little bit worried. Because we're already seeing with ancient Macintosh computers and a lot of electronics from around the mid to late 90s to 2000s, a lot of those plastics are starting to get brittle. I'm kind of worried that these controllers might have similar problems. And if they do, 20, 30 plus years down the line, it's going to be a really hard task to find new parts for these guys that aren't just total cheap knockoff things. So I think we can just go ahead and do what we did last time. Looks like the strat here is to start kind of by the trigger, kind of work your way down. You can see a lot of the finger gun starting to come off. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what I want, but that's also disgusting. It's slightly embarrassing because that's more than likely mostly me in there. But that's the part of why I'm taking this out. I just want to deep clean this, and might as well make a video about it. It's being stubborn though, as always. Come on, you know you wanna. Really? The other side came off just fine. There we go. Okay, if I remember correctly, this controller did have a little bit of stick drift. I know one of my other controllers definitely has one, but this one hasn't had stick drift to nearly as big of a point. Thanks, Microsoft, for using tiny Torx screws instead of Phillips head stuff. See, I've got a bunch of these Torx bits here. Some of the bigger ones can be used. Ah! Some of the bigger ones have sometimes made their way into consoles and some cartridge-based games. Looking mostly at Nintendo, but Microsoft also did that with the original Xbox. Okay. Yeah, it's just one size too small. You need a T8 screw drive head size, whatever it's called. Driver bit, whatever. Alright, slightly forgot about it in the beginning of this video, as you may or may not be able to tell. But when you're working on electronics, especially if there's a lot of screws or a lot of different types of screws involved, it's always a great idea to have some kind of screw organizer. So that way, you can set that off to the side, and you can also just focus on taking things apart rather than always trying to make sure that your screws haven't gone all over the place. Trust me. I used to do that all the time when I was repairing my own electronics. But as soon as I even started considering opening the CobaltRetroShop, I wanted to make sure that I would absolutely minimize the chance of accidentally forgetting a screw or two. Because it's one thing if I'm, fixing my own electronics. I don't necessarily care whether or not my own electronics have all the screws. But if you don't have all of your screws, that could potentially cause some problems with structural integrity depending on what screws are left out. So I always want to make sure that I can put back as many of the screws as possible. Now, if I remember correctly, I think there is a screw somewhere in here. Ah, there we go. It's a little bit too high, but there's definitely a screw in here. This might look like a screw that matches the rest of them, but sometimes it's better to not take the risk. Okay, that came off pretty easy. That's good. Okay, I can actually kind of see that this screw is still being a bit stubborn. Not wanting to fully come out. There we go. Okay. Ah. This looks like more or less the same type of screw that the rest of this controller has. However, sometimes it's better to not leave it the chance, because if you do put in a screw that's too long, that could potentially damage plastics, that kind of stuff. Overall, though, this controller is actually not in too bad of condition. My main points of worry there were the midpoints of the shells where a lot of human debris likes to gather, and then kind of the same thing with the sticks. Overall, these sticks are actually in pretty good condition. It's just the gunk that I am concerned with. So for the purposes of this video, I actually don't want to go too far, as this controller is actually functioning absolutely perfectly. So you can see a little bit more in here about what's going on with this motherboard in particular. Motors down here, we've got an antenna, presumably for the wireless functionalities of the controller. I mean, everything looks pretty good, actually. So it just needs pretty much just a good clean, and it's like a brand new controller. So one of my favorite ways to clean electronics, especially if there's a lot of small crevices involved, a toothbrush and isopropanol. Again, if you just want to casually clean your controller, like get into some of the more easily accessed crevices, then totally taking apart your controller is not going to be necessary. But I'm the kind of guy that likes to go a little bit deeper with this kind of stuff, especially since I started the Cobalt RetroShop. Now, I don't constantly take apart my controllers like every month or something like that, but it's always good to at least occasionally, every 3, 6, 9 months, or whenever you have a cold, it's always a good idea to do a deep clean on your controllers, as deep as you're comfortable to go. Because if you want to go this far, but it makes you nervous, you might want to practice on something a touch less valuable, because these controllers can go for a lot of money sometimes. But if you're comfortable going this far, you can totally do it. I mean, it's just 5 Torx screws, and you should be able to get it open pretty easy. So, just gonna continue to spot clean this guy. We should actually be able to get this pretty clean. Again, there's no major corrosion, there's no break in the plastic. This is pretty much a perfect example of what a controller should look like, except for the fact that it's a bit dirty. Which, as you can guess, it's very normal for a controller to have about this level of filth, especially after a couple of years of use. Would consider myself a gamer, but I actually don't play games as much as I used to, for a variety of reasons. Cobalt Retro Tech, ironically, being one of those things. But whenever I have time to do so, I like to not only spend time with software that I grew up, but also taking care of the hardware, because if you don't take care of the hardware, you're not going to have software. And the unfortunate truth, really, technically speaking, is pretty much all electronics will die at some point. It's just if you don't take care of a console, like, take a few hours of break every once in a while, or you put your console in a very thermally disadvantaged environment where it can't expel enough heat, or if the thermal paste is dry, yeah, you're gonna have problems. But in a case like this, the problem really is just that the controller is dirty. Now, that in and of itself isn't necessarily a problem. I mean, I've went this long with dirty controllers, and, I've been actually kind of thinking about cleaning this for a while, but I mean, strictly speaking, you don't have to. But it's always a good idea to clean. It's always a good idea to thoroughly clean and test electronics, especially if you're going to go ahead and sell them on eBay. Just because it's less work on the buyer's part to get them up and going. Like I said before, this controller is actually in really good condition. But I do want to kind of at least semi-attempt to clean out these joysticks here. Because one of the biggest causes of stick drift isn't necessarily wear and tear on an analog stick, but that can be a huge reason. No, one of the more common reasons is actually just dust and or debris getting into these sticks and causing bad reads of the stick. So if you are experiencing stick drift, there's a chance you can just fix a controller by just putting some deoxit in it or something else like isopropyl alcohol, and that can fix the thumbsticks. Now, if the thumbsticks are still having an issue even after you clean them thoroughly and made sure that you clean them thoroughly, then there's probably some other problem with the thumbsticks, which may or may not dictate in whether or not you actually need to replace them. Um, which replacing these thumbsticks looks like it's going to be a little bit of an adventure whenever I do need to swap out a joystick on an Xbox One controller. As you can see here, they're actually soldered into the board. Um, a lot of third-party controllers, especially the really fancy modern ones, have modular thumbsticks. I really wish manufacturers would just adopt that as a standard. Just having all of their controllers have removable thumbsticks, at least first party, because that would alleviate a lot of problems. But yeah, I mean, at this point, all I need to do is go over some of the areas I may have missed here. Looks like I missed a little bit there. Looks like I missed some here. Maybe my original pass wasn't quite as thorough as I thought it would be. That's always a thing to do with this kind of stuff. So you always want to double check. You want to make sure that you're not missing screws. You want to make sure that you're not having too many screws. I'm not sure how that would happen, but in theory, that's possible. And you always want to make sure that you're not going to make the controller more gross in the process of cleaning it. Yeah, just kind of going over the edges here. Looks like this bottom shell actually did a semi-decent job here. So at this point, I should be able to start putting it back together. We just slide it in like this. And now I should be able to take my Torx bit screwdriver and start putting this back in. Might want to give it a second before forcefully putting the screws in, because you don't want to accidentally break or stress plastic that you don't need to break or stress. And I may have briefly forgotten about the concept of the controller faceplate, which may or may not actually be equally as important as the bottom shell to hold this whole thing together. Okay, now we're going to put the faceplate on. Now, except I need to remember to put the thumbsticks on and essentially do the reverse of what we just did. Wow, I got the first stick immediately, but the second one is giving me problems because of reasons. There we go. Okay, so now I can put the front faceplate back on. You can start putting the screws back on. I didn't intentionally mess with the wires related to the rumble feature, so that should still be intact. And now we're just going to go ahead and reinstall all the screws. I'm just going to go ahead and test this controller real quick, make sure I didn't screw up that bad. Okay, here we are on the controller. configuration utility on Xbox. I believe we can kind of poke at this a little bit. I'm making this controller vibrate. It feels correct. Definitely vibrating on both sides. Oh yeah. Left trigger, right trigger, left bumper, right bumper, D-pad, right thumbstick, left thumbstick, directions of the thumbsticks. Nothing seems to be drifting. So if you've got a controller that's chronically dirty, I would highly recommend cleaning your controller. Some of it's for preventative maintenance, some of it's just, don't want to touch hand gunk all the time. Yeah, that's more or less the process of taking apart one of these controllers. It's basically just 5 Torx screws at the T8 size, and you're golden. Just need a plastic pry tool or even just long fingernails. It's actually not that hard of a process. This is actually fairly repairable, relatively speaking, in terms of modern controllers. Good job, Microsoft. This was pretty easy to get into, blah, blah, blah. And with all that being said, thank you for tuning into this Cobalt Retro Tech video. If you like what you saw, please leave a like. If you want to see more, please subscribe. And if you want to support this channel a little bit more directly, I have the Cobalt Retro Shop eBay store linked in the description below, along with a Patreon page that starts at $1 a month. Speaking of my patrons, I have to thank my Kilo supporter, Indian Mac, for helping make Cobalt Retro Tech possible. Thank you. With all that being said, have a good one.